Hello everybody, it's the Historical Gamer once again, and today we're returning to our War in the Pacific Let's Play series against XTRG. It's a play-by-email game. It is December 26th, the day after Christmas, and we're looking through our combat results this turn. XTRG a couple of turns ago began bombing Singapore. We'll see if he continues with that. You can see here we have a surface action group here near Savi in the South Pacific that is maneuvering and engaging a lone Japanese transport here. We have 2 heavy cruisers and 3 destroyers, so I'm pretty sure we're going to obliterate this ship, assuming it's not able to escape. And it's already gotten hit by 1 shell from a destroyer. It is firing back, interestingly enough, and putting some shells in the water, but I don't think its odds are very good against this force. Our gunnery isn't very good, though. This is a nighttime engagement, worth keeping that in mind. And we're closing all the way into 3,000 yards there. An 8-inch shell hit on it. I'm pretty sure this Kamikaze Maru is going to go down without much more of a fight now that we're getting some good solid 5 and 8-inch shell hits on it. So we're going to fast forward through here. This was the lone Japanese surface ship remaining from the invasion of Savi there. You can see here we hit it with 21 shells. And that's okay. You know, we expended a fair bit of ammo, but those heavy cruisers are going to fall back to New Zealand, where I'm kind of having a rear echelon base to pull some of my heavy forces out of the Fiji area, mainly because I fully expect XTRG to launch a massive assault against Fiji, and I don't want to lose half my fleet's heavy cruisers trying to oppose, you know, 5 or 6 Japanese carriers. And my carriers are going another direction, so without that air cover, it would be kind of suicidal to try and resist XTRG there. Meanwhile, you can see he has a landing force at Mersing, or at least a cruiser force bombarding at Mersing, a light cruiser, the Kashi. We'll see if we can get an airstrike in against these guys. They're bombarding at night against our troops here. But we're going to go ahead and fast forward through the bombardment. Looks like some escort ships. So this is, yeah, there's Japanese transports here. This is a fast transport group, so he's bringing in a small amount of reinforcements here at night to bolster his position at Mersing. We had attacked there last turn. We had done a fair bit of damage, but also lost quite a bit ourselves. And, you know, it looks like he's trying to bolster his position there. Honestly, we pulled almost all our troops in the north out from the north, so Mersing's value is primarily in delaying how quickly he can get to Johor Bahru and eventually drive on Singapore. That's the advantage of Mersing at the moment, is that it prevents an earlier breakout and rush down the peninsula by bottling his troops up. I'm not sure if I want to attack there anymore, though, because barring him bringing, like, 2 infantry regiments in to sort of batter his way in and take the city, there's not a lot that I think is at risk for Mersing. Even if he were to take the city, there's no airfield there, so I'm pretty content with just kind of taking maybe a little bit more of a passive role there. Meanwhile, he is escorting his bombers here in on Singapore. You can see he's dropping bombs on the runway here with some G3M2 Nels. And quite a solid force of Nels there. They carry a reasonably heavy bomb load for the Japanese. The Nels, Bettys, and Sallies are the Japanese best options for shutting down air fields. He hit Singapore last turn with 70-plus bombers, but did no damage. And he's doing maybe some damage here, but it's hard to tell. This is always so couched in fog of war. We'll go ahead and fast forward. You can see 2 Nels were damaged by flak. It's claiming we had 4 B-17s damaged, 4 Buffaloes damaged, 2 Buffaloes destroyed on the ground, 1 P-40E on the ground, and 1 Wildebeest. I'm not sure how true that is. You can see here it's claiming 6 airbase hits, 2 supply hits, and 11 runway hits from the 41 Japanese bombers, which are bombing at 12,000 feet. It's not above flak, but it is above our light flak, so there's a little bit less risk there for them. Another raid coming in, these ones unescorted, 26 G3M2 Nels. Would have been nice to have some fighters up to intercept and ravage these guys, but alas, not to be. I ordered my fighters to take another day off, get a little bit more rest and relaxation. We had about 65 fighters, I think, we could put in the air, between 30 in the Dutch East Indies, 30 at Singapore, and about 10 at Johor Bahru. So I think we had around 70 fighters that we could bring into the air to intercept them. And frankly, with the large Japanese fighter escorts he's bringing in, that's probably not super viable at the moment there to try and intercept, at least until I get a few more of my fighters that were damaged in that first big air battle over Singapore back in action, back healed up and ready to go. Meanwhile, we're continuing to bomb in China. We've got some SB-3s and A-29A Hudsons bombing some Japanese troops that are withdrawing from the Battle of Yichang. So we'll go ahead and fast forward through that. Not a ton of damage done there. Fair bit of recon going on here, but not a lot of action so far this turn. Another large Japanese raid coming in on Singapore, 48 Ki-21-2A Sallies, the best Japanese army bomber, again with 25 Japanese fighter escorts, 9 Zeros, and 16 Oscars. I wonder what their fatigue level is, because they're flying pretty much every turn. So I'm kind of curious about that. I wonder if maybe, you know, our fighters' fatigue levels drop. They haven't flown in 2 days. There's a Sally knocked out by flak. But I wonder if that's something we can take advantage of here as our fighters start to get back up to strength. Anyway, we're going to fast forward through that. You can see 3 damaged by flak, 1 destroyed. It's claiming 3 more B-17s damaged on the ground, 2 more Buffaloes, and a 4th raid here, this one of 7 Lilies and 22 Sallies. So he's now hit Singapore with over 100 bombers this turn. I would imagine that that's going to do some damage, but we'll have to see once we get out of the combat results. Another of small raid, 9 bombers coming in. 1 destroyed by flak. Looks like they're all trying to, and then some unescorted Lilies coming in as well. Looks like they're all targeting the runway. There was, the first raid did do some damage, it said, to some of the personnel, but everything else has just been focused on the runway. Meanwhile, I ordered my Catalinas to fly on torpedo attacks along with the torpedo bombers I had out of Singapore, mainly because I was trying to knock out that fast transport group. Doesn't look like we're going to be able to hit them. He does have some fighters over Mersing here, which just shot down a couple of 139s and Hudsons and whatever, so that kind of sucks. So he's got a cap defending the Japanese land forces there. Most of my bombers are making it through. We're suffering some damage, though, at least by these later raids with these biplanes, where we already overwhelmed his cap by that point. Not doing a ton of damage, though. Blenheims, we'll fast forward through that. Again, no real damage there. Again, these uncoordinated attacks coming in. That one, nice. 10 biplanes did 21 casualties of damage. That's good. Let's see here. We're kind of going through. I think this is the PM phase of air combat. More Catalinas going in. He's got 10 Zeros, but I think our Catalinas are coming in under the 0 protection. Also, there's severe storms, so the intercept is a little bit difficult. You can see 2 Catalinas coming in on this Japanese destroyer. I really wanted them going after the light cruiser, but they overshot and went toward the rear Japanese surface task force. We'll have to adjust their orders next turn. Oh, no, now we're into the PM phase. All right, so detecting subs and other things like that. Let's fast forward through this a little bit. A lot of recon, but not a lot of combat here, it seems like, in the PM phase. Okay. More Catalinas coming in. Zeros, again, fail to engage them, so that's good. At least the Catalinas aren't getting shot to pieces. Again, they're... Oh, damn it! They got a torpedo hit on the Japanese destroyer Mishoto, but it didn't detonate. Fuck, that would have been a killed Japanese destroyer. That would have been awesome. More 139s coming in. It looks like the Zeros didn't engage them. They were clear air over the target. Surprisingly, they didn't do any damage. Fast forward through this a little bit. I don't really... It seems like a pretty quiet turn all around. Heavy Japanese efforts at Singapore, but other than that, not much going on. The I-2 near Johnston Island has been firing torpedoes at a destroyer of ours, which has been guarding a supply ship that is dropping off supplies at Johnston Island. You can see here our destroyer is doing some depth charges against the sub. It does say there was a close hit with the I-2, but looks like it lost contact there, so 1 hit, no real damage. No surface combat here in the evening phase. The Dutch sub KX-8 just hit a patrol boat, the Chokomaru, number 5, to the west of Japan here. Our first submarine foray into the Yellow Sea and the East China Sea and the Sea of Japan area, where large Japanese supply convoys coming from China are presumably operating. But yeah, it looks like that's going to do... Well, no, we've still got to do the land combat phase, so let's jump ahead to that. Japanese deliberate attack here at Chusan. We've got 2 corps and some engineer units and some headquarters units here defending. The Japanese outnumber us more than 4 to 1, so they'll probably take this. They do. They capture Chusan. Our troops are retreating toward Wangkao here on the coast. Looks like they had 23,000 troops. We had 12,000. They got 2-to-1 odds. We lost over 4,000 men, 146 squads destroyed, 99 non-combatants destroyed, 53 engineers, 21 guns lost, 5 units retreating. That's a very bloody nose. They'll probably chase us to Wangkao and then take the city. Meanwhile, the 48th Corps here to the east of Xinyang is being attacked. We already lost the city of Xinyang. We basically evacuated it, and we're pulling the troops north to Nanyang, which is a more defensible position, but we had one corps kind of cut off behind the lines. That's okay. It's delaying the Japanese advance. Meanwhile, Japanese deliberate attack at Miri. The oil facilities at Miri are very important. They're the largest Japanese oil wells on the northern Borneo coast, and you can see there we really didn't have much in the way of forces to oppose them. So the Japanese did take this base. Our troops did retreat into the interior. Meanwhile, a deliberate attack at Brunei, which also has limited oil facilities, reduced the fortifications there, but didn't actually take the city, so that's good for us. That'll kind of hang out there a little bit longer. I wish I could see XTRG's game to see what damage to the oil fields occurred. Anytime you fight a battle in those oil fields, there's sort of like a scorched earth policy that the Dutch soldiers generally follow. So you typically see pretty heavy damage to the oil fields there, but we have no real way of knowing that yet. I could probably do recon over it to figure it out. But that's going to do it. A pretty quiet turn outside of the bombing on Singapore and the one transport we sunk near Savi. So yeah, I guess we'll jump into our turn now. All right, everybody, now that we're done with our turn or our combat replay, let's go ahead and take a look at the turn. So, as you'll remember, we launched some attacks against Japanese shipping along the Malayan Peninsula, but we didn't actually accomplish anything. The Japanese appear to have landed some reinforcements, but not that many. On Mersing, we're showing 3,800 Japanese troops, 19 guns, 0 AFVs, so still a relatively weak force. Meanwhile, we have 286 assault value here. We have about 88 guns, so about 4 times their figures in guns. We're low on supply, but there is supply trickling north from Singapore, so we'll have more supply in the meantime. 2 of our 3 full-size brigades each have more than sufficient supply, so I'm actually going to launch a shock attack this turn in an attempt to overwhelm his forces before he has a chance to bring additional reinforcements in. My hope is that if we can't reduce him completely, we can at least cripple his forces badly enough that he is going to basically need to bring in more troops than he even just brought in order to remedy the situation, kind of turning this into a bit of a quagmire. Now, you know, it's not great for us to continue reducing these 3 brigades. We have assigned, actually 4 brigades we have assigned here, but, you know, we'll do what we can to try and end the Battle of Mersing here shortly. To that end, we are bringing up some reserves. I don't think they'll arrive this turn, but the 28th Gurkha Brigade, with another 101 Indian infantry squads, is on the way north to Mersing. It's about 23 miles away. Additionally, we have issued orders to the 5th Field Artillery Regiment, which has 15 18-pound guns and some Bren anti-aircraft guns as well, to move north to Mersing. And we've also ordered some of our other troops at Johor Bahru back to Singapore. So the 1st HK and S Heavy Anti-Aircraft Regiment is going to move back to Singapore in an effort to counter the increasing Japanese air raids there. And we've also moved some of our bomber units back. So I'm kind of shrinking out the force in Johor Bahru because at a runway damage of 41, we can't launch any offensive operations against Mersing. So we're pulling back some of our aircraft into Singapore. We have 155 aircraft in Singapore right now. Of that, 69 are fighters. We have 38 fighters that are currently ready. We have additional fighters that are on the way. I know at least 6 P-40s are on the way via rail. And we're going to strengthen this force. Remember, this force was over 100 ready fighter aircraft before the first major battle of Singapore. We're going to try and launch the second major battle of Singapore this turn, which means we're taking a bit of a risk. But the reason we're doing that is his strength against Singapore is continuing to rise. Our airfield service damage, so essentially like the service buildings, the hangars, the repair shops, the armories, those are up to 23% out of 100% damage. The runway damage is still low at 6, but 23% is starting to get into that danger area. It was basically at 0 last turn, and then his raids of over 120 bombers last turn brought the service damage up to 23. The only reason it's not completely shut down already is the airbase is relatively large at a size 6. So what we're actually going to do, mainly to keep his focus on the airfield and not on our troops, which we want to give as long as possible without any sort of enemy threats to them, what we're going to do is we're going to try something a little bit tricky. Now, you'll remember we launched a PBY strike against his shipping near Kota Baru with some PBYs armed with torpedoes. We didn't do any damage, but the interesting thing was the PBYs came in at about 2,000 feet, and the Japanese failed to intercept them. They had a cap there. They had fighters that should have torn those PBYs to shreds, but because our PBYs were so low, the Japanese fighters were unable to engage them. So we're going to try something a little bit devious here, I think. What we're going to do first off, his bombers have been coming in regularly at 12,000 feet. That seems to be the altitude he set them to. I think that puts them just out of range of the light anti-aircraft, but it's still within range of the heavy anti-aircraft. That's the other reason we're moving that regiment back to Singapore. But what we're going to do here is we're going to go ahead and take our Buffalo 1 fighters. So we've got 21 Buffalo 1s that are currently ready for combat. And we're going to set them to 100% cap. Their fatigue level's really low, as you remember, because we haven't had our pilots flying around lately. Their fatigue on all of these units is low. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to order these guys to fly at 13,000 feet, 100% cap. That 13,000 feet, and this is the way the game works, I'm aware of this, that 13,000 feet, if he continues to send his bombers in at 12,000 feet, they'll be able to dive down on them and engage. The good thing is, in this game, you don't want your cap to be too high above the bombers. There's actually a penalty if you're too high. And that's what we just saw in Malaya, where his fighters were too high to engage. At 13,000 feet, there's enough altitude advantage over the bombers to get a speed advantage and a effectiveness advantage, but there isn't enough of an altitude above the bombers to prevent them from seeing them or engaging them or whatever. So we're going to order the 21 Buffaloes to engage the bombers at 13,000 feet so they'll dive down on them and hopefully tear into those formations. Meanwhile, our better fighters, our Flying Tigers, the 8 H-81A3s, the 5 P-40E Warhawks, and the 4 P-40B Warhawks are going to fly in at 20,000 feet. And so these guys are going to come in at 20,000 feet. Well, actually, I think I have them staggered right now. We've got one lone P-40E coming in at 20,000. We've got a grouping of... Why don't we just set them all to 25,000? I think I'll do that. Yeah. I think I'm going to set all of these guys. All the P-40s are going to be set to 25,000 along with the Flying Tigers so that they're coming in 1,000 feet over what his zeros have been coming in at. Although the 20,000 is... I don't know where I'm going to go with this one. Because 20,000, they get a pretty big penalty above 20,000 feet. 15 maneuverability is way behind the zero, but it's respectable-ish. At 25,000 feet, they'll be at 11 maneuverability. And I think the H-81 is even worse. No, the H-81's the same. Is the P-40B worse? Well, that's funny, because I've got the P-40B set to... Wait, no, this is the P-40B. What about the P-40E? What's that at? Yeah, so this one gets even worse, down to 6 maneuverability at 25,000. So I don't think we want these guys flying at 25. We want these guys at 20. I don't want to lose half my maneuver capabilities. But I wonder if we'd be better off setting the E's, or sorry, the B's and the Flying Tigers to 25. Because right now they'll get dove on. I'll think about that. So we'll have the P-40s come in at 20 and 25,000 feet. We'll have the Buffaloes come in at 13,000 feet. And the idea there is there will be a 13,000 or about a 12,000. His fighters are at about 24,000, I believe. So there will be about a 12,000-foot difference between his bombers and his fighters. And I think he's making a mistake here. I think you want your bombers and your fighters more in tune altitude-wise. Obviously, he's dropping the bombers down a bit so that they can more accurately hit the airfield, and they're doing that. But if we challenge him, that's a lot of altitude between his top cover and where the bombers actually are. And my hope is we put our fighters either above him or between him and his bombers, and we'll interdict their ability to get down to engage with the buffaloes. I don't know if the game works this way in this level of detail. I know that if there's too much altitude between two groups, they won't intercept. I know that the game benefits a multi-tiered cap approach. So if you have a 25,000, a 20,000, and a 15,000 foot cap, you will generally see better results than if it's all at 25,000. That's my understanding of how the game works. That's what I've seen in the forums and I've looked at online, and I've had some discussions with Belugan. So my understanding is you're better off having a multi-tiered cap. And actually, for that reason, we'll leave the P-40s at 20 and 25. That'll have two tiers, a group of fighters below and a group of fighters above his zeros, kind of sandwiching them in and hopefully keeping that dogfight at a higher altitude while the buffaloes come in low. Now, based on what we've seen, he's been regularly escorting 60-plus fighter aircraft with 100-plus bombers. 38 inferior fighters is not going to be enough. The good thing is it's not all we have. We haven't been using them lately, but we have 35 additional fighters at Djambi. These are Dutch fighter aircraft. The 75A7 Hawks and the CW-21 Demons are the majority of those fighters, and then we have about 13 Buffaloes. The B-33D is the Dutch version of the Buffalo. So we've got 12 of these 75A7 Hawks, and these things are actually pretty maneuverable. If you look at these guys, 30, 27, 20, they're more maneuverable than everything else that we have out there. Their guns don't have as good a value as the American planes, but their maneuverability definitely is better. They have 4 30 caliber machine guns on board. That's not terrible. It's better than like the Nates on the Japanese side. So we'll have these guys come in at a long-range cap over Singapore, and they're going to go in at 13,000 as well, mainly because these Dutch aircraft aren't going to fare as well against the Zeros. Their pilots are far less experienced, and their aircraft in general aren't as good. You know, we're talking 13 Buffaloes and then 12, better than Buffalo aircraft, but nothing, too untoward or special here. You can see, again, the Buffalo actually is it has a 50 caliber. Is this a 250 caliber machine guns and 230 cals? So it actually is a better armament than the Hawks, although it's less maneuverable. In any event, we'll send these additional 35 aircraft in at medium altitude. So we'll have about 35 and then 13, 21. So we'll have 56 fighters coming in at the altitude of the bombers, and then we will have 17 fighters coming in to try and occupy the enemy combat air patrol. That's the scenario. 38 Dutch fighters, 35 American and British fighters at Singapore. That gives us a total fighter force of about 73 to intercept his raid, and hopefully that's enough. Meanwhile, we've moved a few bombers from other parts in the Dutch East Indies, these 6 Hudsons. We've got 11 Hudsons over here. We're going to continue pounding Mersing as best we can with our air cover, operating out of Singapore. So if we take a look here, we're going to send 38 aircraft. Actually, no, these are fighters. We're going to send 69 aircraft, hopefully. Or at least a good chunk of the 69 aircraft, including some wildebeests, some Blenheim 4s, B-17s, Wirraways. We're going to be sending these guys against the Japanese troops at Mersing, and then we're also going to be setting these troops here to a shock attack to try and overwhelm the Japanese resistance. At least to get like 3-1, 4-1 odds. We're probably not going to take the port this turn, but we might knock the Japanese teeth back a bit. If I lose 40 or 50 combat value here, but I can inflict heavier casualties on them and we don't lose too many squads destroyed, then these guys can all recoup once they're in Singapore if the squads aren't destroyed. And then, hopefully if we kind of give these guys a big enough bloody nose right now, then next turn or 2 turns from now when the Gurkhas arrive, we can finish them off. But We'll have to see how that all plays out. We'll probably need at least one turn to kind of get our supplies back up a bit after exhausting a lot of this. So the fact that Gurkhas will probably take 2 turns to arrive is okay. The Japanese will have a little bit of time to recoup and maybe bring in additional reinforcements. We'll have to see, but that'll depend on how the battle goes. Additionally, we've started moving some of our reinforcements that I had actually placed at Rangoon toward Singapore as well. I don't want to put all my eggs in the Singapore basket, but I do have some buffaloes that, frankly, they're not going to be terribly useful at Rangoon. He hasn't made a play on Burma yet, so the fact that he's not even bombing Burma makes me feel I'm wasting these fighter aircraft. So I've moved 16 buffaloes to the city of Medan, and then next turn I'm going to move them to Singapore. So even if we lose 11 or 12 buffaloes this turn, we're going to replace them all next turn when we get that squadron of buffaloes arriving. Additionally, I've started moving 10 Blenheim IFs. These are actually Blenheim night fighters, and I'm kind of tempted. I'm moving them a little bit closer to Japan or to Singapore because I'm tempted if I can get 10 of these twin engine aircraft in as fighters to intercept as bombers. If we can have light air, if this tactic works, if keeping our fighters to occupy his fighters works, then boy, oh boy, could a twin-engine Blenheim tear apart a Japanese bomber formation. Yeah, it's not going to be very maneuverable, although interestingly enough, it's actually more maneuverable at 21,000 feet or 25,000 feet than the American fighters are. So this is even a better result. But it's got 5 303 caliber Browning machine guns, 1 in front, 4 center, and then it's got a top turret one as well. So these guys could be really useful and durable, perhaps, at wiping out Japanese bomber formations. So as much as we can make the Japanese bleed over Singapore, that's our objective. Last turn, the Japanese did lose a fair number of aircraft, although we lost more. We lost 17. They lost 10. They lost 2 more Sallies to flak. They're up to 56 Ki-21 2A Sallies lost. They're up to 58. If we take a look at total aircraft loss so far, the A6M20 tops it at 101. I'm stunned at how many they've lost, but really it comes down to the fact that they lost like 40 to flak at Pearl Harbor on December 7th. Second is the G3M2 Nels, which we did ambush and 46 G4M1 Bettys. If you remember, when he first started bombing Clark Field, I think we shot down 30 or 40 of his bombers before he wiped out our fighters at Manila. You can see here 51 P-40s have been lost on our end. Again, that was mainly losses in the Philippines, and the rest of the casualties are here. Japan has actually lost 454 aircraft so far against the Allies at 380. So far, the advantage sits with us in terms of air losses. Granted, that's all subject to fog of war, but it is what it is. So that's the situation in Singapore. Whoa. That's the situation in Singapore right now. We're going to be launching an attack at Mersing with the supplies that we have. We're going to be launching a max effort combat air patrol over Singapore. This will be the Battle of Singapore Part 2. It's like 3 days later. But again, we need to try and give the runway a little bit of a respite. Even if I lose like 15 fighters or so, if I can get this service runway damage back down to 0 or around there, then he's going to have to spend probably 1 to 2 more turns, depending on the weather, even if I don't oppose him bombing the airfield to get it back up to where it is right now. At least 1 day for sure. So that would be 2 days for our heavy flak unit currently in Johor Bahru to march south to Singapore. And, you know, I think that would be really useful. Actually, we should send this guy here too. 3-inch 20 count AA guns, because then we could form a brigade of heavy anti-aircraft at Singapore. And again, if those units all get down there in time, then you know, we can deal him a lesson, hopefully, that he will not soon forget. But yeah, so that's the situation. I'm going to keep this anti-aircraft unit here at Mersing. If I can reduce Mersing, then I'll move it south, but I want to make sure that his bombers, if they do decide to start focusing on our troops there, don't have a free path. But in any event, the 29th Battery of the 3rd Heavy Anti-Aircraft Unit moving to Singapore, 8 more heavy guns. That should help increase the casualties in his air attacks on Singapore. You can see here we've already got a fair number of heavy guns, 17 heavy guns in the 1st Indian Heavy Anti-Aircraft Regiment, 16 heavy guns in this regiment. So we'd be moving from 33 to 41. That's a reasonable increase. That's like a 25% increase in total firepower for our heavy anti-aircraft guns. It's definitely not nothing. So that's, something to kind of keep in mind. Meanwhile, the rest of these guys are in really good shape. Like, they all have basically no disruption, no fatigue. They've got some suppressed units, but, most of them are in really good shape to help resist the Japanese when they do arrive at Singapore. So Fortress Singapore is building up. We don't have a lot of attack value there, and I hate to put 300 of it at risk at Mersing, actually 400 when the Gurkhas arrive. But I really also, the risk if I don't do enough at Mersing is that if he drives west and cuts off the peninsula, I'm not worried that these brigades won't get out in time, because they've probably got sufficient time to get out. I'm not too worried about that. Most of the guys here at Tulamua are going to be transferring by rail, and they'll be in Singapore at most in 5 days. So we're going to have another 160 assault value at Singapore between those two brigades that are coming south. That'll give us about 630 assault value, but he's got to be coming south with at least 2,000. And the concern is if he takes Mersing and cuts the peninsula off, yes, I've got 300 assault value here at risk, which is basically like half or 3/4 of a full Japanese infantry division. But the concern is that if he drives west and cuts it off, then I won't have sufficient time to have these units that have all engaged replenish their supplies and get rid of their disruption and build the fortifications in Singapore up. Currently, we're a level 3 fort. I'd love to get to level 5 or 6 before the siege is vested. We're trying to help that out by building up the fort in Johor Bahru to act as a speed bump. But any troops that we lose at Johor Bahru in terms of dispersion or disruption or anything like that, they're not going to be ready to fight in Singapore right away. So, it's a good little tripwire there, but it's something we've got to kind of be careful with. If he brings too much strength, we might not be able to hold out at Singapore too long. And so it's really important, in my opinion, to drive them back into the sea to give all these troops, 2 more weeks or more of trench building. Now, I've been talking about this for 20 minutes already, so this is a little bit long-winded. I'll try to go a little bit more quickly. We're pulling out the Flying Tigers from Wencao. We're moving them to Changsha to regroup. We've pulled the Flying Tigers at Nanying down to Changsha. This is actually a bit of an accident. I had Flying Tiger elements in Changsha, Wengchao, Chengti, and then Nanying, as well as Chao up here. And I pulled one unit out of Wengchao because I thought that unit's parent was in Changsha. I was wrong. That unit's parent was actually in Nanying, but I had already moved it, and so it left a portion of it behind that was damaged, and it had moved itself, and then you can't move again. So then I decided to just consolidate my troops, bring the guys down at Nanying down here, and bring the guys up at Changsha here. So I'm kind of consolidating the Flying Tigers for the moment at Changsha, along with the rest of our Air Force, really. I don't know where we're going to move it to after here. We'll probably split the 2 squadrons up to see where it makes sense. Maybe we'll fly some out of the western portion of China here to apply top cover over Wuchou, because the Japanese appear to be moving in here. So that's, probably an area they may start trying to bomb us. Or maybe near Yichang, I'm not sure. I've called off the pursuit moving south for our troops. I was pursuing the Japanese troops we expelled from Yichang, but with the Japanese advancing out of Hankow now in pretty good strength against our 2 corps here, I want to make sure that we just pull back to Yichang and kind of dig in here, and let these guys kind of get away. It takes like a week to move a hex when there's no roads there and you have bad supply and there's no guarantee we'd even win. So we're going to pull them back to Yichang. Yichang is kind of the tripwire in our new defensive position, which is going to focus around these cities along this river line here. The real weak spot of this defensive position is to the west, near Guilin or Liuqiu. These are the 2 weak spots because they're not terribly rough terrain. You can see there's a little bit of rough terrain in this hex, but not really much here. It's pretty flat, and they're not terribly built up yet either. And we don't have a ton of troops here. So as much as we can hold him off at Wuchou, that would be great, I think. The longer we can hold that fort, the better. And actually, we only have a level 1 fort, too. So, frankly, maybe we're better off just pulling out and pulling back to these towns. But I'm not sure. The nice thing is both of these towns are on a rail line. So if he does make a major push for Guilin or Lu Chao, I can bring in large numbers of reinforcements from like Changsha or whatever, and I can rail them west within a couple of days. So that's at least something that we can consider. I'm also pulling back this corps on the border of Indochina back to one of these two towns. I'm pulling troops out of Pakoi to one of these two towns. It's got a little bit of resources in the city, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really feed the Chinese economy. We have no way to bring ships in here, so it is what it is. We're also pulling a rather substantial force back to Wencao here on the border. We've got over 400 assault value there. We've got another 160 on the way. So we can probably tie up the Japanese troops, the two divisions here that just took Chuxing at the city of Wencao, which is pretty important. I mean, it's 200 heavy industry, 80 light industry, 60 resources. This is an important city for the Japanese. So we'll try and hunker down here and at least divert some of their strength. We're still building up in the north, and that's the situation in China right now. Philippines, no real changes. We are unloading more supplies. We've got 2,500 supply here at the port of Bataan, so we're dropping that supply in here. We're up to 52,000 supplies in Bataan. The fort level's up to level 3. It's a quarter of the way to level 4. I have ordered to expand the airfield. I should have done that a while ago. Right now we're getting a spoilage penalty. I think like anything above like 36,000 or something like that supply is subject to up to 20% spoilage per turn. And so that's because the base is too small to support the amount of supplies we have there. So I'm ordering the airfield built because that'll give us a bigger spoilage deck, I think to around 53,000. And if we can do that, it'll allow us to hold out a lot longer. I may have waited too long. My hope, however, is with 139 engineers and 24 engineering vehicles that we can very rapidly build up that airfield here before the Japanese get too close. Meanwhile, we've got about 180 strength at Manila. We've got about 557 strength at Clark Field, all basically acting as a buffer or a tripwire for the Japanese before they actually can, get to Bataan. The further out we can keep them from, if we can keep them in these two hexes and away from Bataan, that's great, because once they're in Bataan, our ability to build up forts and whatnot kind of slows down a bit. Additionally, we also have about 9,000 more supplies on the way to Bataan. I've been kind of sneaking in these small little AKL convoys that XTRG seems to be missing. So we're sneaking in another 9,000 supplies. I don't know if we'll make it there, but it would be great if we could unload another 9,000 supplies here and build that airfield out so we could keep all of it without suffering the penalty. Still pulling more oil out of the Dutch East Indies, 22,000 loaded on tankers at the Balkapin. Palembang is at 150,000. Oosthaven's down to 4,900. Some of our fuel levels are starting to go back up on the Dutch East Indies after we pulled more than 100,000 out of Java. Trying to see here. Oh, we've got one tanker there. Yeah. We're also moving submarines out to in front of Miri in Brunei. I'm imagining at some point he's going to start moving tankers into Miri to kind of pull the fuel oil out of there. It's a pretty rich, it's actually, I think it was the richest refinery on the northern coast of the island of Borneo. And there you can see here it has 300 oil, 300 refineries. It looks like the Dutch did a good job when they retreated of sabotaging those oil facilities. So he's only got 150 operational oil, 151 operational refinery. So that's good. And hopefully a fair amount of the fuel stock was also destroyed to limit his ability to pull oil out. I've also started pulling some of my sort of recon aircraft, some Seagulls and some Kingfishers and whatnot out of the Philippines because Lord knows we're not going to hold on to the Philippines forever now, are we? Meanwhile, 2 PT boats. I think all of our submarines are out of Manila. I'm trying to get these 12 P-40Es repaired. I just can't get enough supply to the base at Iba, which is a little bit frustrating. Any of these do like supply? I don't think any of my aircraft here can do supply. Or if they can, I've got like one of them. I would love like a supply drop here. The 18 Beach can't. No, it even can. It's recon only. Well, crap. Anyway, we're also trying to build up a little bit of a base here at Kagan, or however you pronounce that. We've got one fort. We were building another one. We're up to 75. We don't have very many engineers, though, so 2's probably the highest we'll get it up to. I also don't like that it's on the coast, but it's really the only place that I've got. I mean, I could try and fall back to Malaya Balay, maybe. But the nice thing about Kaigan is its location. It's kind of already a natural destination for supplies. We don't have a lot of supplies in the southern tip of the Philippines, though, on the island of Mindanao, so that's going to be a challenge. We also have 2 subs that were badly damaged. The Perch and the Sea Lion are making a run for Surabaya, so they can go ahead and get repaired. We've got subs moving around here. We've finally got subs into the Yellow Sea and toward the Sea of Japan to try and interdict some of the Japanese supply convoys there. And oh my goodness, this is going to be a long episode. We're already up to 28 minutes. Meanwhile, I had 2 Indian brigades, which I diverted from Singapore because I didn't want to reinforce failure. I'm sending the 45th Indian Brigade to Port Moresby to strengthen the force there. The 25th Indian Brigade has 108 infantry squadrons, 6 Bren sections, 4 Vickers, 9 combat engineers, 3-inch mortars, engineers, 80 support, and 44 motorized support. So we're going to bring that and its 108 attack value into Port Moresby, which will bring the total garrison strength up to just shy of 200 attack value, including the Port Moresby Brigade, which is interesting that it's actually a reasonably strong brigade. CMF infantry sections, too. They're Commonwealth infantry rather than militia. And then we've got the 49th Australian Battalion, which is also regular infantry based out of it, as well as an RAAF base force. So I think with the addition of another brigade and a little bit more supplies, the fact that we're already up to level 2 forts and we're reasonably far along on building a level 3 fort, that'll really help strengthen Port Moresby and make it more challenging for him to take. Additionally, I'm moving these companies over here that are along the northern New Guinea coast to Port Moresby. If they can get there, it'll probably take like a month, but it'll add, another like 30 assault value or so, or 20, about 24. So it'd get us over 200 assault value at Port Moresby, which will kind of be our bastion on the southern tip of the island of New Guinea. Meanwhile, we're working our way through the Pacific, and I haven't even done anything in this episode. We're unloading some additional supplies here at Nomaya. We've got the 39th Australian Battalion ashore. We're up to 69 garrison strength there, but that should be going up very shortly. We've got the 5th Royal Australian Artillery, or Coastal Artillery Regiment here, that's moving to Nomaya, and it's going to be unloading. It'll be 27 sections of infantry, granite militia, but still 27 sections of infantry, plus a small contingent of engineers, a small contingent of 3-inch heavy anti-aircraft guns, as well as 3.7-inch anti-aircraft guns, and then 9 6-inch coastal guns to strengthen this port up. So it'll bring its strength to just shy of 100 assault value. And then in addition to that, we've got the 4th Australian Brigade, again, mostly militia, but we've got the 4th Australian Brigade on the way as well, which will bring another 108 infantry. Actually, wait, are these regular infantry sections? Oh, it says regular in the TOE, but the actual unit is comprised of militia. Nonetheless, so it'll consist of, another 66 or so assault value and 65 assault value. So the 27 that we're going to get here will bring us up to 96, and then the other, we'll be around the 150 range for assault value here at Nomaya, which is respectable. I mean, if the KB comes in and tries to hit New Caledonia, we'll be a little bit screwed, but he won't be landing an SNLF force and taking the island by itself. He'll at least have to commit a regiment or maybe a brigade or a combat team there, which would, presumably limit how rapidly he could advance in the South China or South Pacific. Additionally, the island of Fiji is in a little bit of an interesting position here. So we've got 3 regular Army New Zealand battalions, actually consists of a brigade that is here. Additionally, we've got the 9th Australian Brigade here, so we've got 227 combat value. We're moving the brigade west to Nadi. I'm going to try and get the garrison at Nadi to be up at around, that's at 78 with these guys, it'll be around, basically around 150 combat value at Nadi. And the reason we're pulling those 74 from Suva is we have the 161st American Infantry Regiment, the first American unit approaching Suva. which is a very strong unit indeed. Regular American infantry squads, has combat engineers, has rifle squads, light machine guns, heavy machine guns, anti-aircraft machine guns, anti-tank guns, 81mm mortars. It has 12 105mm howitzers, 455mm howitzers, light armored cars, a single M2 half-track, more engineer vehicles. This is a very good unit. And its total combat value is not 41. I don't know why it says that. Its total combat value is around 160 just by itself. And they're regular infantry, too. So once they do land, that's going to bring, even though these guys are leaving, it'll drop us down to about 150 garrison. When the Americans land, we'll have 310 assault value here on the island of Suva. And that's not all. We also have a Marine Fighter Squadron and Marine Dive Bomber Squadron. 10 F4F Wildcats. I thought it was 11 like a turn ago. I don't know what happened to the 11th. And then 19 Dauntlesses on their way to Suva as well. So that means we'll have over 30 fighter, or is it over 30, or is it roughly 30? We've got, how many Buffaloes here? 17. So we'll have 27. Well, just shy of 30 fighter aircraft on the island of Suva, which should mean that unless he sends multiple carriers against Suva, that will be okay. Now, we do think he may bring the KB south, but he's already lost probably 1.5 squadrons of Zeros. He may have replaced some of those, but I'd guess he's down at least one carrier squadron worth of fighters. So if he moves south, he'd have 5 squadrons worth of fighters. Yeah, he'd obliterate us. It'd be pretty ugly. But nonetheless, it's going to eat up his time and effort to do so. And then he'll have, in addition to those fighters, he'll also have, some 30 dive bombers to be mindful of as well, and actually some Vincents, which are the Vincent aircraft here is actually a wildebeest. It just carries a bomb instead of a torpedo, unfortunately. So we've got them on the way. They've also got a base force unit that'll help dig in more. So the 119th Base Force, which will give us more engineers and more engineer vehicles. And then we've also got this unit over here with the 111th United States Navy Base Force. These guys were supposed to land on Canton, but apparently only a small contingent of them landed on Canton. So we'll be getting another 4 engineer vehicles and 8 engineers. So a total of 8 more engineer vehicles and 16 more engineers, which will bring us up to about 56 and 14 in terms of vehicles to engineers. That's a pretty healthy amount for a small little island. In addition to that, we're pulling these cruisers back to Auckland, so back to New Zealand. Both these cruiser task forces, we're getting them out of harm's way. We're pulling a lot of our transports back to Australia. We've got an additional supply convoy on the way to Suva to sort of up-supply Fiji. These light cruisers down here are headed toward Auckland as well. They're low on fuel, but they'll have enough to get there. I know the light cruisers out there, but they'll auto-replenish between turns. And then we've got some supply coming into Pago. We've already brought the supply level from red to yellow. We've got an additional 11,000 coming into Pago as well. Let's see here. What else is coming south? Those tankers are empty. This replenishment is not. It's heading to Suva. We've got more supply heading to Pago. We've also got 3,400 Marines coming to Pago to bring their 160 assault value with the Marine regiment to the defense there. So we're going to have about 200. What is it going to be? About 210 assault value at Pago. Very high quality, all American units. Artillery is included in that, as well as the 7th Marine Defense Battalion has 5-inch or 155 millimeter anti-shipping guns. So a very strong 200 force at Pago, a strong 300 at Suva. The Nomaya force is weaker, but if he goes there, we've already kind of said why I don't think that's the end of the world. And then in addition to that, we've also got some other troops coming south too. Just not sure where they are. Probably can't flank speed these guys the whole way though. A lot of supply convoys and the likes coming south. Here they are. 4,000 additional troops going to Pago, construction regiments, base force regiments, and a 2nd American Infantry Regiment, the 34th Infantry Regiment, which means Pago actually could have around 400 assault value on it. That thing would be a bastion. We might divert them to Fiji depending on how that all works. But essentially, we're committing 3 American regiments and 4 Australian brigades to the defense of the Fiji line. In addition to that, Perth is getting a lot of fuel. It's up to 106,000 fuel units. We've got a lot of units unloading fuel, a lot more than the docks support. I noticed that the fuel level dipped in Sydney this turn, though. I think it dropped to 60,000. It was at 100,000 last turn. I don't know if that's because we're equipping new troops or we saw the heavy cruiser and light cruiser that had engaged the Japanese task force near Savi. The Perth and the Canberra both are back in Australia. They're replenished. I don't know if maybe they ate a lot of fuel, although I don't think that much. I'm not sure what happened there. But yeah, so last thing to talk about, guys, is, and maybe it's better to detail this out in the next turn if not a lot happens, but I know some of you said you had hoped that the turns were a little bit longer, so this is a chance for that. I have a lot of fighters on the American East Coast, and a fair number of them can actually be deployed against the Japanese, like these P-30, what are they, P-39D Airacobras. But I'm actually committing the majority of these guys to training missions here. So we're deploying all, if we just look at our fighters here, I don't have enough political points to set up my other squadrons yet, but I have deployed all 201 fighter aircraft that we have on the East Coast to pilot training. That means they all have their regular complement of 25 or whatever, number of fighters, but I've also massively increased the number of pilots assigned to them as much as I can. So these guys have 32 pilots for 25 planes, 32, 25, 32, 25, 18 to 18. Interesting. We should probably up that. Although maybe we'll actually deploy, I don't know. The F4Fs I may want to just scrap and take as replacements so I can upgrade my my fighter squadrons on my carriers. So we'll see about that. But I don't have enough political points anyway to replace their commander here and really increase this. What I'm trying to say is my understanding, and I could be wrong on this, but my understanding is the best thing to do to build a training squadron is to have a large number of aircraft and a greater number of pilots. And according to the Excel spreadsheet that I saw, that kind of gives you like a breakout of how you can set the allies up initially. Some of these units weren't included in it, but essentially the idea was you drop the altitude a bit, so where it's at 10,000. You set the training level to 100%, so all of the planes are currently going to be training this turn. You have bonus pilots so that you don't have every pilot flying every day, which keeps fatigue down. And then you find a commander of the unit that has a high inspiration and high air skill level. Now, unfortunately, I don't really have commanders with a skill level much higher than 69 in terms of air combat, but a 60-plus inspiration, 60-plus air is about the best I can do, and so I've got all of these pilots in here with like sub-50 experience, no missions under their belt, and they're going to be trained by this particular squadron. And as these experience levels tick up to around 55, 60, 65, or whatever, then you start pulling these pilots out, and you put them in the reserve pool. So you go ahead and you put them in, if we go to the aircraft replacement, no, not that. If you go to the aircraft loss, no, not that. Top pilots, you go, where do I go? Pilot replacements, yes. You go to the reserve pool, and then you assign these guys into the reserve pool. So there's a fair number of not so experienced pilots currently in the reserve pool, some really bad ones too. Some of these guys are wounded, but a lot of the bad ones are like, Dutch pilots or Chinese pilots that really aren't going to play much of a role, or even some New Zealand pilots. But the idea is you want to fill this pool up with really experienced pilots. Because essentially what happens is if you lose a casualty, like if this W.N. Gibson, wing commander W.N. Gibson, his experience level 68. So if someone in a Australian patrol squadron, because he's assigned to the patrol group, goes down and is killed, he may be pulled out of this reserve. And then he'll go into the reserve, and then he'll replace that casualty. Now, let's say there was no one left in this reserve. What would happen? Well, there's multiple different pools. We don't really use TRACCOM in the Allied forces. The groups are guys who are already assigned to squadrons. So really, if this reserve runs out, then what you end up having is you end up pulling a pilot from the replacement pool. So the reserve is like trained pilots who are ready to go to combat. Replacements are just, hey, you get a butt ton of replacements that show up every month. For example, the United States Navy gets 600 replacements per month. So they can lose 600 casualties a month and still have pilots. Now, Depending on how many you're losing, that may or may not be an issue. So, for example, the longer a pilot is pulled from the longer, so let's say a month goes by and 600 replacements are dumped into the U.S. Navy pool. Right now, there's 6,766 pilots in the American Navy pool. Those pilots are broken out between 1 to 3, 4 to 6, 7 to 9, and 10 to 12 months. Pilots who have been in training 1 to 3 months show up in this first column. Pilots who have been training for 4 to 6 months show in this column. Pilots of 7 to 9 here and 10 to 12 here. And essentially you can see there's a different average experience level for pilots at different levels. So if we run out of pilots in that reserve pool that I told you about, then what ends up happening is you have to pull from the replacement pool, which basically means you're pulling guys out of training who haven't actually completed pilot training yet. So we would have to pull someone from the 10 to 12 month range, which would be a level 33 experienced pilot. A very bad pilot, half the experience of that first pilot we were looking at. Or in the case of the Australians here, a 28 pilot. Which means that essentially you're pulling crappy pilots who are not yet done training into the frontline service. And essentially that's what happens to Japan later in the war. That's why the pilot training program is so important for the Japanese to be able to maintain quality troops, because they very rapidly run out of pilots in their groups. The reserve rapidly runs out as well, and if they haven't set up an adequate on-screen training program like what we just showed on the East Coast for our fighters, and they're not training those pilots in units, then they start pulling from here. And then it's very possible for the Japanese to get into a situation where they're pulling pilots out of 4 to 6 months of training because they've run out of pilots in the 7 to 9 or 10 to 12. And these pools will keep growing and growing and growing as we get more and more replacements and as this pool expands. But it's just sort of a really high-level look at how pilot replacements work. I mean, it's very complex. There's a lot to it, and I'm sure I'm making mistakes or a little bit misstating certain things, but essentially that's my understanding of how pilot training works. We'll probably dive into it a little bit more in the next episode, but this episode's already about an hour, so I do want to kind of be mindful of that, and we'll catch up on some of the things that we didn't get to today. I am bringing the 193rd Tank Regiment with about 90 assault value to Pearl Harbor to bolster the strength there. It's already in the Pacific headquarters. And we're pulling the 2nd Marine Defense Battalion and moving it to Johnson Island to strengthen the garrison there. So Johnson Island, it's a little bit weak. It only has 18 assault value. I want to make sure we strengthen it. So we'll bring it up to about 60 and make sure he can't just drop a small landing force there. I plan to do the same thing at Palmyra, and I also plan to do the same thing at Christmas Island. Canton, honestly, as much as I would like to, it's too close to the Japanese front line. It's too close to Ocean, Tarawa, and Funafuti, especially now that we've seen he's taken Funafuti. He's going to retake Canton. He may take Baker. Both of these islands are, too close, I think, to the Japanese, but they're both, if my counting serves me right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23. I think these guys are all, well, first off, Baker Island's small. It can't have larger than a 1 airfield, most likely. Canton has 2, but so I'm pretty sure that they're out of range for all of Japanese bombers. So he can take Canton. He'll get some scouting out into this area, but he probably won't be able to bomb Christmas or Palmyra. So these islands will fall, but anything more than a nuisance raid by extremely long-range small patrol planes isn't going to do much. And then we can still put our patrol planes here, build our screen out here to the west, and then move our convoys in behind in relative safety from being detected. So Canton and Baker may fall if he does counterattack there, but I'm not going to reinforce. That's too far forward. It's too much of a risk. Not with the fall of Funafuti, not with the fall of Ocean Island and Nauru Island and Tarawa. We just don't have the strength to be that far in advance. So with that being said, I do want to strengthen Palmyra, Christmas, Johnson, because they kind of are our shield to the troops coming in from Pearl Harbor. And then ideally also would probably want to put some troops on Perrin Island as well. There's not a lot between Pago and Christmas Islands. Essentially the Samoan Islands and Christmas Island, there's a pretty big gap here that he could sneak forces through. So we probably want to put some stuff on Penryn Island as well. Not a lot. It's an atoll. It's not very large, but it's the only thing even remotely close by that we could do anything with. None of these other bases are any bigger, so maybe we'll put like a small battalion on here as well. But the focus right now is the South Pacific, is the Fiji line, if you will. Pago, Suva, Nadi, and Nomaya are sort of our bulwarks. And if he gets troops ashore at Comac, there's nothing there right now. It says level 0 airfield, level 1 port, unlike Nomaya, which is 2 and 2. So he'd have something to start with on Nomaya. He wouldn't on Comac. That would give us time to, maybe use all these dive bombers that we just got. That are at Brisbane. We could train these dive bombers in real-world experience. We could have these 60 dive bombers just pound his troops at Comac nonstop if it came down to it. I also have issued orders for the dive bomber crews as well to be training up. You can see 17 pilots for 13 aircraft. They're set to 100 train. They're set to naval attack. And their currently experienced levels, these are all like green pilots. Average experience 28, so they were clearly not very good pilots. We might actually be better off pulling some reserve pilots in here, but for the moment I'm going to use this as a training squadron because those guys are below average even for the replacement pools. Anyway, guys, that's going to do it for this episode. The big thing that we're hoping goes well for us, and we'll see, is the combat over Singapore, where we're committing a max effort of our fighter planes against the Japanese there. We'll see if that goes well, and hopefully if it goes reasonably well, we can replace all of our losses with this Buffalo squadron coming south to Singapore, and maybe even a Blenheim squadron over here. Meanwhile, a major attack at Mersing, hopefully to deal the new Japanese troops a bloody enough nose that essentially it negates all the reinforcements he sent there. With that being said, guys, I'm going to go ahead and sign off here. Hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know your thoughts as always, and until next time, this is the Historical Gamer saying thank you for one more thing. One more thing. Prince of Wales over here to the west of Oosthaven. It is sailing relatively clear, I think relatively safely. It can make 8 knots, 56 float, 16 system damage. It's moving at flank speed to try and get off the map as quickly as possible and away from any potential Japanese risk. But it's far enough west that I don't think there's any chance that recon squadrons will show up. I think the only real risk is if he was to move his carriers down into this area, they might detect it. But hopefully in the next week it's gone, and the threat to it will be gone. Meanwhile, Cape Town, we're trying to move the repulse into Cape Town's shipyards as quick as possible, so we've switched it over to flank speed, and I'm running my only little experiment because I do not believe ships use fuel when they're off map. I could be wrong here, as it does look like some of these ships are using fuel, but I wonder if it just will automatically replenish these guys, or what. So we'll run it at flank speed 1 turn just to try and close the gap and get us closer to Cape Town at a faster speed than we otherwise could, so we can get the Express and the Repulse repaired ASAP. I'm hoping the Repulse is like a 1 month in dry dock type of a situation, but I don't know. We'll see. The Prince of Wales, if it makes it, is probably a year plus, but I've been told the off-map dry docks are more efficient than the on-map ones. So, we could move it to Colombo, but the efficiency of the shipyard there is much less than the shipyard at Cape Town. So if we move it to Cape Town, it should take substantially less time to repair. Additionally, we are moving our battleships out of Pearl Harbor, some of them, which have have gotten repaired enough where I think we want to pull them back to the mainland. So you can see several of these ships have suffered reasonably high damage, but nothing too crazy. So I'm hoping I can sprint them out back to the mainland inside of a week, because again, the mainland repair centers are much more effective and efficient than Pearl Harbor, and getting them out of Pearl Harbor should one, remove the risk if he does come back and bombs Pearl again, but 2, also get them repaired much more quickly at the risk of being hit by one of his subs, which we're trying to divert around the subs we've seen. Okay, with that said, now we are ready to conclude this episode. So I hope you guys are enjoying the series. I'm going to throw a link to a Discord chat where I do talk a lot about my plans and my thoughts. This is not my Discord, so I know some of you have asked, hey, do you have a Discord that you can share where we can talk about all this stuff? I don't have my own, well, I may set up my own personal Discord at some point in time. I am advertising another YouTuber's Discord. He has changed the name to include my name in it, mainly because I'm in so many and Discord, if you're not familiar with it, is like a Skype, or really more like a Slack type of an online chat type of a room that a lot of gaming people use. It's very popular in the gaming space. So I'm going to share the Slack of a YouTuber called Tortuga Power, who is another strategy YouTuber who frankly, he's a great guy, and consider him a friend, and we chat a lot. And he has a Discord. He has set up a channel on that Discord called The Historical Gamer, where you can feel free to go and talk, and I mean go anywhere in the Discord you want and talk. But if you're interested, you can head on over there. I spend the majority of my time on Discord in Tortuga's chat. So if you post something there, fair bet I'll see it, especially if you post it in the channel with my name. I may set up my own private Discord at some point in time, but I have no hesitancy to recommend Tortuga. Just keep it civil and safe. It's not my Discord, so obviously Tortuga reserves the right to police his place as he sees fit. So don't be jerks. I'm sure you guys won't. Just saying, it's kind of him to do that, and frankly, we've been toying around the idea with like a joint Discord. I know there's several like strategy game Discords out there, but it's just every YouTuber has their own Discord. It's like I've got 15 Discords open on my account. It's kind of like, maybe we should think of a better way to consolidate things. And this is my own little effort toward that way, so you don't have to keep joining new servers. Anyway, if you're interested, the link's in the description. Long enough exposition on that. And we're over an hour now, so I'm going to go ahead and sign off here. Hope you guys enjoyed. And with that being said, our December 27 planning session is complete, and we'll see what the next turn has in store for us. Thanks for tuning in, guys, and until next time, this is the Historical Gamer saying thank you for watching, and I'm out.